Welcome everyone. My name is Nils Swart. I work at Plexi. Aside from being janitor of the San Francisco office, I'm also leading the business development team at Plexi. And what we wanted to do here is kind of preview or give you an overview of where we are with this magical thing called the data service engine, where we are with that at Plexi, and more specifically what we've done in the last 6 months, what we're doing in the next 6 months, and how we're seeing some of these integrations move forward. I think one of the key observations ought to be starting points of why on earth are we doing this? And one of the first reasons is if we look at the state of the industry, then back then, define then, everyone loved SNMP. It's like it's great, and everyone loves it as long as it's their MIBs. So the challenge being, you can be open, but here's my set of private MIBs that you have to work on. And now, really cool thing is everyone loves APIs. The problem is very similar to MIBs, namely, as long as it's mined. As an end user or as somebody who has to operate an infrastructure, this change of SNMP to a proper RESTful protocol is great. It's actually a good step forward for a lot of the information you want to get from systems. The only downside is that it's still somewhat proprietary. Hopefully, you can get the documentation of APIs. If Colin McNamara was in the room, he would have immediately jumped on that. But in essence, what it boils down to is everyone has their APIs. The only problem is connecting those APIs back into your infrastructure is it's actually really hard. So when we explain the Plexi value proposition, when we explain what Plexi really does, we tend to hover a little bit on the side here, talking about the hardware, and hardware being a means to an end to get our software to do its magic for affinities in your infrastructure. That's all great, but in reality, the larger problem that also has to be solved is how does this fit into the rest of your infrastructure? How does this fit in with systems that know more about the workflow of your organization and how VMs are named, what their naming structure is, how applications get fired up or torn down, where storage systems are living, or what your application analytics tools are and telling you. Those are the things you look to figure out what is this infrastructure doing. How do you connect those together? If everything on the left has their own set of APIs and we jump in and say, hey, here's our API, go and connect them together, that's not really a solution. So what you've heard us talk about 6 months ago is the need to integrate and the need to do that in a way that's replicable, not just for us and the equipment that you're using, but hopefully between those sets of equipment and those non-Plexi pieces of software that are being utilized too. So from our perspective, this integration portion of the infrastructure has, that traditionally has been the harder thing to solve, but the thing that most network vendors kind of stepped away from. They shied away from it. And we're trying to take that on sort of full force. We're trying to figure out how do we plug ourselves into higher order systems without being relegated to just keying off of a set of VLAN tags that are presented to us. So what we've been doing over the last roughly 6 months is in essence figuring out where this prototype should go. And we've had a number of requests from both the audience here as well as online. Show us the code. You told us to go and open source it. Where are the next steps that we can take here? I think what we've been trying to figure out is where should it go, and what are some of the things we would do immediately with a data service engine together with our own controller and our own infrastructure. The thing we tried to do in the last 6 months is figure out for all of these categories of systems, what is the most meaningful stuff that we can get out of them. And for instance, for storage systems, if you can support one, then you've probably found the right level of information to also go and poke at other people's APIs for instance, open source storage systems like Ceph or Swift. Application performance monitoring, we've showed you Boundary in the past. There are other APM tools, so we kind of know what information we can get out of them. And more specifically, it's kind of an on-demand action that's required off of a DSE. Compute systems, they're a wealth of information. So let's be safe. We're touching the tip of the iceberg here. If you start to poke at SOAP for vCenter, which it's one of those other funny things where talk about APIs, everyone has their own. Some still use other transport protocols for it. But vCenter has a ton of information about the VMs and what their storage relationships are. So we're touching the tip of the iceberg and getting the information out. Devops Tools, we've got an example of that. Networking, open daylight, communications. We've integrated with HipChat. We've integrated with Twitter. There are all sorts of things we've done in the last 6 months to figure out where should this go and what's the highest value for our end customers. And I think we're at a point where we can safely take some next steps in the next coming months. First, I'll answer a very simple question. That is, why do you guys keep hammering on HipChat? I don't know if you guys are familiar with HipChat, but this is their small list of integrations that they support today. So HipChat as a tool, look at it as sort of a glorified IRC with clients all over the place. Mobile, servers, your own laptop. And the key thing for them is, how do you get everyone in an organization on the same page in a sort of real-time way? And that's where HipChat kind of came in. So they have integrations with continuous build systems where errors in a continuous build system like Jenkins are showing up in a common HipChat group. They have integrations with this thing called Copper Egg. Copper Egg does cloud monitoring across an entire infrastructure. They have integrations with Plivio, which is a interactive voice response system. And those who know Derek from early on in NFD times, he's been talking about voice for quite a lot. Zendesk integration for trouble tickets, Nagios for host notifications. There's a ton of stuff people have already integrated in essence, a somewhat slower message bus protocol, but still a message bus protocol. So what we've done is integrated HipChat for two reasons. One, we needed a console to actually go and interrogate our own wealth of information that we have accumulated in the DSE. But more importantly, everything that happens in a DSE channel, in a HipChat, a room, and anything that happens, we can key off of as well. In other words, if any of these systems trigger something that's of importance to your infrastructure operations team, we can probably match on it and do something with it in the infrastructure. Now, for those of you who have worked on the operations side and have seen sort of the major challenges in getting operations teams kind of informed, this already is a very cool list of integrations. And if you think about what that could do, directly interfacing with more information in the network, that's simply mind-boggling. Now, the other realization to kind of bring in with the DSE, but also working a little bit further on the affinity definition, is that completeness is not required. So what we're trying to achieve here is, yes, I want to understand what the intent was, kind of a higher order message to an entire infrastructure, but I can fill in the details as we go along. So this particular example is kind of a silly example, but it might be useful in that I want to group, or I want to say from a relationship perspective, I want every VM with an uneven UUID to be mapped to a production storage system of vendor Y. This is a very valid policy, except for the uneven bit perhaps, but it's a valid policy that is completely devoid of any network details underneath. But if you give us this information through the DSE, we can start to take steps. First step, for instance, we iterate through every single virtual machine management system that you have, which might be multiple instances of vCenter, might be vCenter plus OpenStack, might be a plethora of other systems you have. And with that, start to figure out, list all the UUIDs that you have, and pick out the ones that are uneven. Now, again, silly example, but it's there for a descriptive reason. And then the second step you would take is, if I know all my storage systems, figure out which ones are in a production environment, which is a piece of metadata, which ones are vendor Y. And with that, we're a little step closer to networking, which is step 2 in this case. Get us all the information of those VMs and get us L3 or MAC information, and likewise for the storage systems. And with that, we have a more detailed affinity that is at our disposal to be used in, for instance, Open Daylight or inside of Plexi. Now, the key point to make here is, if you've grown up in sort of networking, then if you type CLI, everything has to be syntactically correct and complete. What we're suggesting here is not to go all the way into policy, the bigger systems policy, but somewhere in the middle. Give us the intent on the left-hand side, and we can gradually make our way into an actual infrastructure. And more importantly, we can do it in an automated way. I don't want anyone to have to update the policy on the left-hand side if you happen to add new storage devices or new VMs that come on board. So in a little bit more detail, how we've utilized the DSE and how we're thinking about this and what we've developed for the DSE so far is the Open Daylight example. We had the DSE 6 months ago. We had a way for the DSE to both interrogate our controller to figure out what affinities exist, and there are ways to change and add to affinities that are in Plexi. What we've added to that is a channel, and when I say we, it's largely Derek here. What we've added to that is a way to get the entire topology out of the Plexi infrastructure. In other words, as it stands, there is a publicly accessible data structure in the side of the DSE that gives you the entire overview of all the paths inside of the Plexi ring in this case. And we have MAC attachments to it. Now, the other part that had to be written was, how do you get those affinities that are defined inside of Open Daylight, take them out, and put them inside of the DSE? So that ultimately, you can push affinities created in Open Daylight through a DSE into our controller. Trigger a fitting action that Martin described, and then push topology information back out. So there are two things that were really worked on. There's a topology component that we've added, and then there's an Open Daylight channel that was added subsequently to push API calls around. Now this is roughly the type of integration that we intend to work on going forward, and it kind of follows along with the one that we talked about earlier, that is sort of ops code chef. And I regurgitate that one because I think it's a very powerful one. Namely, on the left-hand side, the operator has knowledge of web servers, or whatever they call their web servers. A set of templates. Every new physical box or every new VM is instantiated with a set of minimum software versions, minimum configuration details. So those nodes that were tagged with a role web server are at that moment deemed to be in compliance with that DevOps system. Now, if you add a new node, wouldn't it be cool if that new node is tagged with a role web server and everything else is done for you in the network? And that's, in essence, a very similar information flow as we've seen with Open Daylight. We're fetching information from Chef, set of nodes, set of roles. We keep that up to date inside of the data service engine. And this channel is entirely reusable, by the way. So if in the future you want to get entire binary objects out of Chef, you can pull it out as well. Push that over the message bus to the affinity component inside of the data service engine and generate an appropriate affinity, either generate or update the affinity going forward. Now, aside from the fact that this is automated and you can probably script your way into this scenario using other methods, the key thing to take away is everything that happened on the left-hand side of this screen is application semantics that have virtually nothing to do with the network infrastructure itself. It is what your company has decided is a particular role. And it might be a production environment, it might be non-production environment. These are all settings and configuration details that are known at customer level and not necessarily at network infrastructure level. The big question then is, so what are we going to do with the DSE next? Because we said last time around, wouldn't it be nice if this is open source and accessible? And part of the reason why it would be nice, by the way, is that the more of these channels that are available, the more mappings of information you can make. So if I have this interaction with Twitter, I could potentially key off of hashtag NFD7, and with that constantly show you how many affinities I have in the network, for instance. Wouldn't it be nice if it's not us that has to develop that, but something that you could develop yourself? So I've looked long and hard sort of what the right way forward is here. We have come to a number of conclusions, and one of them is the DSE success depends largely on openness and a willingness of people to contribute to this. In other words, posting this code on a website and calling it open and open source, doesn't benefit the end user at all, and doesn't benefit us either. So certainly what we want to do is work on a number of channels ourselves, bring those out. But more importantly, we'd like to see if we can get a few people actively involved so that we can grow the community. We want to align ourselves with the work that's currently happening in Open Daylight and in OpenStack, not least of which because we see that as an interesting platform to sort of take next steps with. There's a wealth of data in all those systems, and there's a little pun here trying to see if you're still awake. They're also a combination of either troubleshooting heaven or hell if you look at it. Those of you who have seen some of the presentations of the OpenStack Summit in Hong Kong have seen some of the very large deployments. They look at that as a great opportunity to automate their entire troubleshooting system, but it was out of necessity, and we want to, align ourselves with some of the movement there. So then the big question is, how do we open this up? This is a kind of a roadmap-y thing. So this is a SOX compliant roadmap coming up from a startup. So it's roughly the timeline that we're looking at here. It's between now-ish, soonish, then-ish, and later. The very first thing that we're setting ourselves up for, and as you'll see, we're adding human resources to this as well. So we're hiring for some of these positions. There's a bunch of cleanup and hardening that has to happen. So yes, we want to bring this out and open it up to a select group of people, but we've got to make sure that it's supportable and making sure that we can actually get active code out of it. So that next step is specifically mentioned to be sort of a select group of people that want to develop on this, and the only reason for that is we have limited set of resources on our side. And we'd like to be able to support this through Google Hangouts, IRC, and all that stuff. But ideally, we'd want to grow organically in a subtle way. And then later-ish, we'll open this up to sort of the entire world. The difference between sort of slow rolling it this way versus just dumping code on a website is literally we want this to succeed. So I'd say with that, we've got a quick summary of where the DSE is right now, what some of the areas are that we think are interesting. We can certainly use your help in a number of these areas. So look us up. We'll reach out as well pretty soon. And then another shameless plug, we're hiring like crazy. No, not in this room. You're not in this room. So yeah, we're adding folks to this, and I think all the fun aside of sort of hiring people, I think there is a realization that this stuff is so interesting that we want to add people to this who have actual skin in the game, who kind of understand what sort of integrations really look like. So with that, I'll open up for some questions. You've been a mild crowd sort of at the end of the day. We should do this more often at the end.
I think the DSE it's actually a very hard thing to explain for a certain, like I get some of what you're talking about. I'm going to have to go back and look at this again, like I do with all Plexi demonstrations, because I think you're leading the market in a lot of ways. And I have to think really, really hard about what the impact of that is. But in the past, I've been focused on the hardware and the use of DWDM and stuff, and I'm seeing this shift into focusing on the software makes it more interesting to me, which is, it's welcome change. But understanding the DSE, that's going to take me a while to grok how the interconnectivity between how all that comes together and what is the value proposition there.
What really excites me about it is this next level of data networks and this abstraction that's happening. We're going to get better at integrating business and technological policy. Mm-hmm. So having something like the DSE is going to open up that ability to write your technology policy more to the business policy than the other way around. So.
It's absolutely right. We want to get there, and we're also cognizant of the fact that there are big policy systems out there already in large enterprises. So there is a risk that we're reinventing the wheel to some extent. However, from the network perspective, network infrastructure perspective, there is nothing out there today that does this, which is the reason why we started writing it. Having said that, for us, what's important is to make life easier for the entire infrastructure to be operated. So look at this as a large, potentially large effort that's not purely Plexi. But obviously, the more information we can scrape off of your policy systems, the better our algorithms guys can kind of work their magic.
At a higher level, I think one of the things that's very interesting to me that I think is unique is so anyone that's ever managed any kind of WDM system understands that it's probably got some wacky proprietary Java app that you have to run on a Windows box to be able to bring your lock your transponders and do whatever you need to do. The fact that you guys are doing WDM regardless of what the application of that is, that's sort of irrelevant, right? I mean, you're doing cool stuff with it, but the fact that you're doing that and you're doing that programmatically and you're making it an open API that, say, Open Daylight can control, or some other, anything that, if you want to write it, it can control it, right? I think that's got a lot of implications for things that don't change often, like the wide area. The layer 1 wide area across large geographic areas that are historically run by big telecoms that have guys that still know TL1 and stuff like that.
You don't know TL1?
No, I do not. And I'm not going to learn it.
So the one thing to add to that thought process is that even if it doesn't change a whole lot in the wide area network, the fact that you can interrogate a system like that and bring the information to one central place and
That's huge.
reason about it yourself. The thing is, we can't write all the logic for you. The thing we can do is bring all the information in one place. And if you think that you have to look at uneven MAC addresses, that's great. You can do that. What that means to us is a big question mark at this point. But it's the documenting nature that I think Derek mentioned this 2 NFDs ago. It's like a self-documenting infrastructure. Mm-hmm. I don't think we're quite there yet, but the fact that you can pull this information from various systems is.
I think the stuff that you're doing with this has very deep implications that may not be, that we don't even realize all of them yet, because of the things that you're doing that people have not done before. With regards to those things, I think it's important to pay attention to.
Cool.